Hello, it's David Perlman here for the TheWholeNote studio with my guest, bassoonist Nadina Mackie Jackson.
That's all my names, that's right.
So a number of topics. I think we'll just spin on things. The last time we sat and talked was actually in 2004. So a lot of water under the bridge.
Yes, at the fundraiser.
At St. Anne's.
Yes, that's right. When you came,
you were recording Corette and Bois Mortier with David Bowles.
That's right.
And a fine crew of
amazing,
musicians.
Yeah.
And the context for this is that you're actually on your way to a rehearsal for your next project.
Yes, we've done several in between, of course, but it's another project with David Bowles and some of those musicians. And some others. Yeah.
Okay, we'll come back to that one. I wanted to start with I suppose a silly topic, but a by way of introduction for the one person out there who doesn't know who you are yet. I found myself thinking of the old story of the person who says the grandfather talking to the children who are complaining about life and saying, "Oh, you kids have got it easy. When I was your age, I used to have to walk 6 miles in the snow, barefoot to school." But in terms of your own music education, you've got a story to match that one, I would say.
I do. I think it's still a privileged story because I found music and I had parents who were willing to let me get on an airplane and go 500 miles by myself to do something that they weren't at that time interested in. And
bush plane or close?
Well, it was a small airplane. I didn't pay attention to the make. Small commercial airplane, but one flight per day out of Prince George to Vancouver. I go down, this is when I was 15, have a lesson with a bitter old man and and enjoy every second of it, and then sleep in the airport. Later, like I've made friends after a while, and that was the first time I was almost arrested in an airport. I was arrested later in my career, and they were wondering why a child was sleeping in the airport. And when I said I came for bassoon lessons, they left me alone for some reason, and take the next morning flight back. So
every day?
No, once a month.
Once a month.
Once a month, and that was 500 miles. There were no bassoon teachers that I knew of in northern BC, which is partly why I established the charitable status group Council of Canadian Bassoonists, and we achieved charitable status a few years ago, but I've been too busy teaching to do anything with it, but I'm hoping this year to start that. And it'll be a resource for kids like me and teachers, particularly across Canada, to locate people who can teach them, to contact performers in big centers who can send good reeds, to have video. I mean, videos are already available online, but to hook up
people with
as local as possible, or to arrange for artists that I sponsor to fly in and meet with kids. I have a lot to say about that, but I'd like to actually be doing more with that.
So how did you find the bassoon, if there were...
Yeah. Well, again, in northern BC, so we lived near Prince George, 30 miles, and my dad was a log builder. He ran a school. We were totally off the grid, and he would drive me into town every day, so it was 35 miles. And they had a band program for the first time. It was in the early 70s, and they told me they'd get a bassoon, and I had heard a quintet had come into town, and I'd heard one. I really wanted one, and they couldn't get it. It took 2 years, so I played the flute. I'm a terrible flute player. Finally, the bassoon came, and then I just began practicing. But the guy who played it in the quintet was actually a tuba player, and he was one of my band teachers, so that's why I was brave enough to talk to him, because I was a shy little kid.
And what was it in the instrument?
It's
the
quirky.
voice?
It was simply the voice, and I actually went up to him and asked him to play it at that. And again, I would never do that normally when I was young. I just sit there and listen. But it had a rich kind of curling sound. I really heard it more than the other instruments, and it looked really intriguing. So.
And the rest is history.
The rest is a search to find whatever it was that I heard in that sound. Yeah.
Which is what you're still doing.
Yeah, definitely.
So tell me about the upcoming recording project. What I know already, you're at the Gould studio. Yes. You've got an extraordinary group of musicians that you're working with.
Yeah.
And it's Vivaldi's concerti for bassoon?
Yeah, we've chosen 8 of the 39 concertos for this first project.
Okay.
4 of them I've performed a lot. 4 of them I've learned and will rehearse for the first time today. We'll record them tomorrow. It's kind of standard in our business. It's so expensive to record that we do it either at the sessions with more well-known pieces, but these ones nobody's played, so in our immediate group. So it's an incredible project, and I've chosen players. There are many more I would like to involve, but I've chosen to do it with single strings so that we can do it very, very quickly. And I'm bringing players from the different projects I've done around North America, people that I really loved working with, and a bunch of them are from here, like Aislinn and Julie Wedman. But I've just picked players and the conductor who's flying in between concerts in Cleveland and Sydney to be the keyboard player for us. And it's a real gift to myself to choose friends from everywhere. It's not the most practical way to do it.
Right.
And you don't even need to. They're great players in Toronto that I love playing with. But for me, the recording projects are also a way to immerse myself in the music and an opportunity to learn a lot more about it. So all these players are far more experienced than I am in this music. And it's guaranteed I'm going to learn a lot. And we're going to put together our interpretation quickly. We have 4 sessions for 8 concertos, so it has to be very quick.
Wow. That's two per session.
2 per session, yeah.
You said you'd learned 4. Does that mean you're going to...
I mean, I've learned them all, but I have had the opportunity to perform for them before. Okay. As a solo bassoonist, there are not a ton of opportunities to play them. So every time I get a couple of concertos a year, and with 39 of them, it would take a long time to get through all of them, and I play other concertos too. So doing the project is a chance to really play them flat out, and then eventually people hear what these pieces can be like on a program, and then they'll program them more often.
So tell me about the players.
Yes,
for the Vivaldi concerto project.
Well, I always, for these kinds of projects, and for when I was director of the Grand River Baroque Festival, I always think first of Aislinn Mackie to bring her in, because she's a great player, both modern but incredibly experienced in Baroque music, and she can play Baroque on modern beautifully. Which is what you're doing. Which is what we're doing. It's a modern instrument.
I was going to ask you which of your instruments you had.
I mean, I play Baroque, but I'm just not as deft on it by a long stretch, and.
So there's Aislinn
and Julie Wedman, who we've done a few things years ago, and since then, every time I've asked her, she's been in Europe or somewhere. So finally, and I love her, very opinionated. They're all soloists. That's another big reason why I choose them, although you tend to realize that after the fact. Lots of opinions, lots of experience as a soloist. Violist is David Rose. He was the principal viola in Kitchener, and then he went to State University of New York. But he's been on every project that I've done, and he's a fantastic soloist, and these are the most lively people to work with. And the cellist is very young. He's the baby in the group, and he's from Violon du Roi. Raphaël Dubé, fantastic player, so lively. And our bass player is Dominique Girard. I met him in Violon du Roi as well. And extremely agile, and again, lots of opinions, and the intelligence to know when it's going to be useful to throw them out there. So there's a lot of guidance, but it's fast. People it's not a submissive group. I don't like submissive groups, but they have experience as soloists, so they know when to contribute. But mostly it just emerges in the playing. And then Lucas Harris will be our lute player. And he said it took hours and hours to do all the figures, because Vivaldi doesn't do the figures. We have the facsimiles from the National Library in Turin. We have them all on CD, and then I made copies for everyone. But there are no figures, so he has to write all that out. And Nicholas McGeegan is a fantastic conductor. I've worked with him with Violon du Roi, and he's also done our other recording, our 19th Century Concerto project.
Okay.
And he's just all over the world, mostly with modern orchestras, but he just finished a tour with Philharmonia Baroque, and extremely experienced in communicating Baroque language to modern players. Not that this group is modern players, but we're playing modern instruments. Very funny and very quick, and he'll be doing the keyboards, organ and harpsichord, and making decisions. You just need that incisive mind quickly. And then percussion. We have one concerto that sounds like a Turkish burlesque, so Ed Rifle's coming in to play handbells and things.
So with the question of one player to a part.
Yes.
I mean, I understand the economics of it, but I mean, I know that in Bach's music, for example, there's strong cases to make for doing it not as a budget thing, but as an actual aesthetic choice.
It is an aesthetic choice that works really well.
And does it work well in Vivaldi the same way?
Oh, yeah. I mean, I don't listen to a lot of other bassoonists, but the ones that I do listen to are the Italians. And I flipped over the recording one day just to see how many players they had, and they were single strings, and I had no idea, because it was so sonorous, but very clear and incredibly agile. And so I thought, there's a solution. I can pay everybody more, and this can happen. Yeah. And happen quicker.
And you said you picked 8 of the 39?
Yeah, 37 finished, 2 unfinished.
Okay. And have you chosen them to reflect the range or the progression?
Do you mean is there some kind of cognitive design here?
Yeah.
No. Not really.
Not an early, middle, late, or anything like that, no?
No, I'm a fairly non-intellectual player, and I chose it based on real desire. Like, they're incredibly attractive, very different, all of them. And I've learned them through the years. First of all, I put the 4 that I've played a lot recently that are attractive, and they are all very different. I mean, of course, I have some sense of that. Then the next 4 I picked based on listening to my students learn them and knowing which ones I liked. They have to come alive and in some form or other. And that's another thing. Every year at my universities, I do a Vivaldi Christmas concert, and these kids produce the concert and prepare the concertos. So, and it's also totally unclear exactly when and where he wrote these. Even if I did want to pursue it that way, you get a sense from playing them, but the numbers don't actually necessarily indicate the order of being written. It's the collections where they were found and the times they were found, and they're ordered. Well, you know, there's so many cataloging systems for Vivaldi. The RV numbers group them according to keys, but they're also just strict numbers, like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. But I don't think anybody, I don't know, maybe they do, but from what I've read, nobody knows exactly when he wrote these, even if I'm assuming they were written at the orphanage. And that's the assumption I'm going on, but there's evidence to suggest they weren't. And so that really broadens the mystery. But I can, you know, if nobody knows, then we can make up our own story for now.
And do you have a sense of a final sequence yet? Or do you
yes,
think
I really do. I mean, I've got my own names for them. Like the G minor is the Jack Sparrow meets Midsummer Night's Dream meets Leonora. Like it's this whole tragic thing, and yet very funny at the same time. And yeah, the number 12 A minor, RV 499. That's the Turkish burlesque, and They are very different. I've got hoedown, Italian hoedown. That's that's C major, and yeah, they're fun. E flat major, and he's taken some of them. He's pulled from his operas, and yeah, I'll have to do more reading to write convincing liner notes. But if I were just to sit down and characterize them, the range of expression is how I chose them, not in terms of when he composed them or keys. Although the keys work. At first I thought we were going to, I do have E flat and A minor, but they're far apart and it doesn't matter. And yeah, I'm going from the sunniest keys to the darkest keys in the terms of the recording. But that again is just, I thought of the pieces and then I realized in retrospect that that's how it's going.
Great.
Yeah.
And when do you think the CDs will be? The CD or CDs?
It's one. It's 80 minutes. Yeah.
80 minutes?
We can just cram that onto a CD.
Wow.
And depending how fast our tempi are, it might be just under 80 minutes. I planned for them to be ready to be released. Like, we'll edit throughout the winter. My engineer's from California, and I have to go to California in January to judge the big Vivaldi competition that's being held in Stockton this year, the Meg Quigley Vivaldi competition for young women. The finals are there, and at the same time I'll do the final editing. But it still takes, there's so much else to do to get a CD out. So I'm planning a year from now and to be touring it next year.
Oh, lovely.
Yeah. Yeah. Can't wait.
Still talking about the Vivaldi project. Do you have a title, an overall thread, or a working title?
Well,
you were telling me earlier that you had pet names for each of the pieces, so I was wondering if you've got a pet name for the project.
I think our cover will be something boring like the Vivaldi Bassoon Concerto project. But my project of touring it, and this will be with the Council of Canadian Bassoonists, the whole idea of exposing high-level performance to young players. I want to take this to as many universities as I can. And traditional concert series are great, are fantastic, they're ideal for it. But when you go to universities and show young players how virtuosic this music is, and you know, I've been teaching for a long time, and it's distressing that so much of this music is used to examine the kids, and they learn a fragment of it, or they play it in very slow tempi. Like, there's no intense regard or knowledge of these concertos in our instruments. They don't realize that they have the same vivacity and virtuosity as the violin concertos. Of course some people do, but general knowledge is not heightened or sensitized. And I just know from experience that when young people hear it, they can do it. It might take a year or 5 years, but the more they hear, the greater the quantum leaps are.
So the idea is to take live performances in so that people actually
feel it,
hear it and feel it, because the agility of the instrument is
greater than one would
remarkable,
expect.
and you wouldn't expect it because there's this sense that as it gets lower, it gets slower.
Oh no!
And
somehow Vivaldi was incredibly aware of that. Like, I can get mute with admiration when I think about what he wrote for us. And my favorite instrument to play with is the violin. And of course that was his instrument. And he writes quasi-violinistic, like bariolage and figures like that in the bassoon parts. But he's also extremely aware of the virtuosity of how quickly we can navigate leaps. And other things like our very lowest note on the Baroque bassoon was as virtuosic a thing to achieve in some of the ways he's written it as the highest notes are on the modern. And he puts them in, but it's not just casual, it's
very
powerful.
Intentional and showy.
It's showy. You have to play really well. Like, you pick all these concertos, you think, okay, I can learn this one. Each one has something just about impossible in it, but not impossible from a stupid point of view. It's just the refinement of reflexes has to be so present. And again, I don't feel I have to be perfect to present to university students, but there has to be a certain bravery in plunging into the music and showing it, and especially with the string players, rather than playing it with piano. I love playing it on modern bassoon, but I don't like hearing it with piano. It turns it into a different kind of music entirely. it almost sounds like bizarre modern music because he writes in short motifs that change slightly and sometimes are utterly different from what went before. It makes sense with the strings. It doesn't make sense with piano.
With the piano, with the pure continuo instruments.
I mean, when I say it makes sense, it makes artistic sense in terms of balance of activity and ideas and surprise, provocation, and I forget what your question was, actually. The first I'm wandering down the path.
Well, we're wandering down a path. Backtracking on that path for a minute. We talked about the performers.
Yeah.
And then you mentioned in passing your Tonmeister, but you didn't say who. And I was wondering, there's a San Francisco connection. Did you meet David Bowles, your engineer, through Nicholas McGeegan, or the other way around? No, you met Bowles through McGeegan.
Yeah. Nick said that David was a great engineer. And so we did a project together, and David's really interested in traveling. Like they're based in Berkeley, both of them. But next season, David will be teaching. He's coming in as a replacement at Indiana University, and it'll be his first big teaching gig. He's a very well-known engineer, but he doesn't mind traveling. Well, he's kind of like a conductor that way. And he's brought all his gear for this project, so my living room's stacked with those big boxes right now.
6 years ago, I sat in for part of your session at St. Anne's with him as the engineer. And this one is not at St. Anne's. You're going to the state-of-the-art studio to the Glenn Gould, and I'm wondering about the ups and downs, the pros and cons of a move like that.
I made the decision because we have so little time to record this time. There's so much music to be crammed into 2 days. And the Glenn Gould is relatively perfectly soundproof. I mean, we do hear the subway sometimes.
Right.
We hear something. I think it's the subway.
I bet it probably is.
Yeah, and the St. Anne's is across from the chocolate factory, the Cadbury chocolate factory. There are 3 factories at St. Anne's. Sunset and sundown, the birds go crazy, and the building's covered in ivy. And I think it's beautiful. David does not think it's beautiful. He finds it irritating. There's a big parking lot for the Cadbury chocolate factory, so they're in and out at that time. And the factory itself, these overwhelming smells of chocolate and burning sugar is nice, but they have immense trucks backing in with beeps. And
idling too.
And the last project, the city decided right at the time of our recording to tear up the street track, the trolley tracks.
On that adjacent part of Dundas?
Yeah.
Or Dundas,
right? I had to go out there and beg them to wait, like until our first orchestra break, and they did. Bless their hearts. They had those pile drivers taking out the steel tracks. So that you're vulnerable to the city there, and we don't have any time to wait.
So with the time issues for a project like this, which, needless to say, is not being funded by one of the last 2 labels left on the planet, right?
Yeah, we do have a label, but we pay them, and then they do a lot of work for us. But I'm paying for this one. It's very hard to get funding for Baroque projects. There's no Canadian content. There's no way to sell it in a way that...
Other than the players,
Other than the players. I actually don't even know a category. I've looked.
Yeah.
There may be one that I've missed, and I'll be sad if I find out. But no, I save up or, sell something and do these projects.
Right. Well, it sounds like another good one.
It'll be great.
And maybe I'll come and
I hope you
eavesdrop in the coming week.
You're completely welcome. You're on the list.
Great.
Yeah.
Okay, there's another thread that I wanted to ask about, partly because I'm remembering a long roundabout question.
I like those.
I remember the last time we talked at the time of your Corette One Moitié project. you'd just come off a tour with Violon du Roi, and Mathieu Lussier was also on that tour with you, and I remember I think it was the previous October, you were at Roy Thompson Hall with Violon du Roi.
That was the Mozart Requiem tour.
That's right. And he conducted that entire thing completely off book. There was no score.
Oh, that's right, Bernal,
anywhere in sight. And there was something that I realized almost for the first time of how something gets lifted off the page in a way that is quite extraordinary, particularly in that case in the connection with the choir. Every chorister was completely engaged. And this whole question of memorization has come to fascinate me because, I mean, I assume that in a recording project like this, especially with all of the ornamentation having to be agreed to as you go, that you don't come into a project like this working from memory, that there's an awful lot of secretarial stuff that has to go on all the time. But I just wondered about your thoughts about where it relates to, first, as a player in an orchestral context, how it relates to what the difference is in experience working with a conductor who's working that way, but then secondly also its place in your own work. So two kind of different topics.
Oh, I appreciate being asked about it. It fascinates me too, and as the more I play, the more I realize it's essential to do it. But I have a lot to say about it because it's not easy for me. I memorize easily, but the experience of performing under pressure, I find, frightens me. So my training is all around finding ways to ingrain it in all my senses so that I won't get scared and drop the whole page from my mind's eye. But the basic premise that it helps the performance, I completely agree with. And it was not part of the pedagogy when we were younger, because wind players, I don't mean all musicians, I just mean wind players, our whole training was aimed exclusively towards getting jobs in orchestras so that we could actually make a living. But there's such a broader, and even there it's useful to memorize, because then you don't have to stare at the music. Sometimes you just have to be tracking the conductor, and if he's playing from memory, you don't even realize it. If you're both working from memory, you're not aware of it until later usually. But yeah, in my teaching, I introduce that really early now, and encourage my students to talk to other students about how they memorize, and set up safe forums for them to practice it without danger of humiliation in our master classes, like segments. And yeah, to play this hard music, it has to be memorized. You can't be reading.
Is it the difference between the notes on the page going from the fingers to the mind when you're reading, and from the mind to the fingers when you have it internalized?
When it's internalized, when it's memorized and internalized that way, it feels like you're saying it. And if I'm looking at the page, even if I'm doing it out of anxiety, so therefore it's a crutch, it still feels like it's a test and that you might get the answer wrong.
And you don't want to have that feeling when you're playing ensemble. And you know,
we're not singer-songwriters. For me, interpreting the music of these great composers is creative, but the only way to feel I'm speaking it is to have it memorized. But having said that, it's not easy. Some of my students memorize extraordinarily easily, and they, that is a particular aptitude, but everyone can learn techniques for doing it, and I think it's essential. And then one of my greatest teachers when I was young was Saul Schoenbach, and he always asked us, he was my last teacher before I took up my career, and he insisted on memorization. And it came to work very well for him because he went blind at the end of his career, and he could still play all of his repertoire, and that has to be essential. But it is a craft. And it has to, really when we were younger, it has to be assumed that it's necessary. Our teachers would say, why risk playing a wrong note? Well, there's a whole concept right there.
Yeah.
You have to have some challenge and risk in your life in order to grow and have a voice and to have something worth saying. And I do believe that once that's done enough, it leads to something else in your musicality. So there are lots of reasons why it's a very good thing to do.
In live performance,
yeah,
particularly.
Yeah, but I have to drill myself, and I have to be very, very sure that I can trust myself. So it's an ongoing study.
Charge of adrenaline too.
Yeah. I talk to pianists, and they feel it's quite different because it's such a structured instrument and logical, whereas the bassoon is entirely the opposite of logical. There are so many cross fingerings and combinations. So then it has to be a tactile, visceral, physical feeling that allows you to hang on to the piece.
Interesting.
It is interesting. Yeah. Playing by heart.
Exactly, in both senses of that word.
That's what I'm aiming for.
That's interesting. Yeah.
But I know from performing from memory and then playing with the music, it's so much better to play from memory. So much more exhilarating and spoken.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Getting back to the topic of the voice of the instrument. If you have an instrument that has an authentic voice,
yes,
it should be allowed to speak.
Yes. Yeah.
Interesting. Okay, so moving along, beyond the project, the recording project, you said a while ago when we were talking, you said that your teaching load is lighter this year than it has been in past years. And
it's easier. I've relocated to Toronto. It's the first time in 6 years that I'm teaching exclusively in Toronto. In the last 6 years, I was located in upstate New York and Waterloo and Toronto. Right. So it involved driving to these universities and teaching a day or 2 days at each of them. And I left the New York position after 1 year. That was just too much. And in order to continue there, I would have to give up my solo career, essentially, because they really need somebody who can look after all these kids.
Right.
They have more students down there. And I couldn't do that. And then Wilfrid Laurier in Waterloo was really enjoyable teaching out there, but again, it takes a day or 2 days. And when you're maintaining a solo career, it takes constant work, not only in the playing, but just developing contacts and programming ideas and staying with the new technology that allows us to communicate with people. That made it very hard. So last December, I was in emergency. I just finished a tour with Vivaldi Project. I just finished a concerto in Montreal, a Graupner concerto with Les Idées Heureuses. The last day of the tour in Montreal, I couldn't breathe. I was like that, it just pain. And I called the emergency health line and I said, am I having a heart attack? Because I'm an old bag, right? And she said, so I described it and she said, no, it's not a heart attack, but it might be your lungs. And so I said, okay, if it's my lungs, will I die quickly or slowly? And she said, it'll be immediate. I said, okay, I'm doing the concert, because who cares? Like, whatever. If I'm lying there twitching for hours, that's a drag, but if I bang like that, it doesn't matter. And she said, but, and I hung up. And then I went to emergency in Toronto, and they wanted to put dyes in me to see if it really was my lungs. But I had to play the Vivaldi Christmas concert the next day. I always perform with the kids. And I said, I'll do it later in the week. And they were very angry with me. But I cured it by seeing my osteopath. He said my rib had just moved. And you know, I was just on the road a lot, carrying the horn and putting it up in the airplane and then sitting for hours. You're just not moving a lot. I think something just cranked shut. But the conclusion was to stop doing so much driving.
Trucking around.
I don't mind touring. I'm touring a lot this year, but that's way more active than doing the teaching and sitting. And I love teaching, but it's not my first thing.
Yeah.
So I resolved at that point to relocate everything here. Yeah. That's the short story.
So in the coming year, or with all the extra time not traveling to teach, what are you going to do with all the extra time?
Well, the first thing we have, well, I want to set up the tour, the Vivaldi tour, and I want it to be in different parts of North America. So I can't take any of these players away for a long period. So in the hope of getting the players I want, I'll set up 4 or 5 short tours. And that takes a lot of legwork, especially if I want it to start a year from now. I have management, but I want to do some more grassroots stuff where I contact my friends and university and all these my friends on Facebook. And
right. Well, with the new networking, it's so much more possible to do
and that takes time. My management doesn't have time for it, nor are they hooked up that way, as far as I can tell. So that's my work to do, and that's fun work. And how to shape that. I have a street team of former students, really interesting people who are brainstorming with me for that project. But I also tour with Guy Few, the trumpeter and pianist. And the first thing we do in September, we're going into the studio with Vivaldi, the folk singer.
Oh, really?
He's starting his tour, and he asked us if we'd do a track with him. And I want to take Vivaldi on part of my Vivaldi tour. I want it to be Vivaldi. Like when, I'm going to hook up with different kinds of pop people in different places, because I think it's appropriate, and they're into it. And he's wonderful. He could probably play in the orchestra because his sense of harmony is so great. And anyway, that's what we're doing in September, and then we're flying to Prince Edward Island to do master classes and do big showcases out there. That's going to be really fun. Then I fly back, and I've been hired by what are they? Some engineering group is having a big party in Toronto, and they're having dinner at the ROM, and they want a solo bassoon in the dinosaur exhibit. So I'm going to try to take the Vivaldi in there. I think they've got money. I think they can pay my band. And it's projects like that. And then Guy and I are doing a Yukon Western Canada tour in January, and I'm judging this fantastic competition, the Meg Quigley Vivaldi. It's really the Vivaldi year, is what it is for me, and we're hustling for more concerts. Guy and I have just finished a CD. We've got 3 now, 2 with orchestra, and 1 is our recital CD, because he's the pianist and trumpeter and he does both at once sometimes. But we also have a whole CD of Canadian concertos that we have partial funding for right now, and that we need to record in December. So that I actually, the moment this is done, I have to start hustling for that project, because that's actually a really hard project. I've just forgotten about it for a while. And then we're always, the thing about being a musician is you never have enough money and you never have enough time. But I'd far rather have time than money, because if you have time to think, then you can start linking the projects. And it's great. You teach at all these universities, you get a few more dollars, but it's not enough to make stuff happen. So I'm interested in performing, but I also see it in my students that their minds start to expand, and they don't see themselves merely as people who are vying for the very few orchestral jobs that are left. A lot of them have broader talents. They're very good performers, but they're also fantastic organizers. Or some of them are not strong performers, but they're very sensitive and they can support other performers. And I truly believe classical players have to use their imaginations and make new things happen that integrate this music we love. We don't have to abandon the music, but we have to be more vigorous and come out of the shadows a bit, I think. Why not?
That's a really interesting topic, but speaking of time, that's probably one for a different time. So that's one to definitely come back to.
Great.
But I know you've got a rehearsal.
I should be thinking about that,
Thank you so much.
Thank you, David.
We'll see you
Thanks
again.
very much.